Yes. Well, thank you, Peter. And I think I might just get Peter to write the review of the entire session in the next edition of Peter, because he was paying lots of attention. It was fantastic. I'd just like to ask our panelists to join us now. Greg's already here. He's just got to check his emails while in this little this mini break. And then we've got Mark and Nicole and Andrew as well. I'll ask you to come and sit down in order. So Nicole, you can take your seat there on the far left. Then Mark will come next to you. Then Andrew next to Mark, and Greg can come and join me immediately to my left. We'll just replenish the water. I should introduce myself. My name is Dominic Piper. I'm editor of Australia's Pay Dirt and Gold Mining Journal. I also pack the bags at this conference and move anybody's cars who need them moved or anything like that. We can help you in any way you wish. This is our exploration panel session. I must admit, I'm either incredibly intimidated or suffering incredibly from imposter syndrome. John Hronsky sat right in front of me while I'm conducting an exploration panel, so I'm not going to pretend for a second that I have any sort of expertise in this. I really feel like that John should be asking the questions and probably answering them. Let me introduce you again very quickly, because I think all of them, apart from Andrew, has already appeared on the stage today. We have Greg Miles, CEO of Caspian Resources, Andrew Penkethman, Managing Director of Adair Resources, and he'll be speaking tomorrow, Mark Wilson, who you've heard from this morning, Managing Director of Legend Mining, and Nicole Duncan, Managing Director of Nickel Search. We are discussing exploration, and I was asking the panelists via email a couple of days ago about this space, and thinking back, Bill said this morning in his opening remarks, 10 years ago this was a one-day conference, and we were really struggling, in fact, to put on a whole day of finding nickel companies. And any exploration discussion at the time was really about a relatively small band of ground from Leinster to Kambalda. Really, there wasn't a lot of exploration going on outside of those regions. Today, we've heard from Greg, just on the outskirts here of Perth. Essentially, we've heard from Nicole down in Ravensthorpe looking for nickel sulfides. We've heard from Todd exploring in Scandinavia. We've heard from Mark on the Fraser Range. We've heard from companies right across the country. John Dugdale just talking there about up in the Pilbara, as Azua are as well. We have tomorrow companies exploring in places like Tanzania and Brazil. I mean, it's been a remarkable period for nickel exploration, I think it's fair to say, in the last 2 or 3 years. Greg, I'm going to start with you, because you are in one of these new regions. I mean, what's happened? What's driving this success?
Well, we opened our minds for a start. And to be honest, you probably need to go back to people who've been in this game even longer than I have. And when you do that, you go back to Western mining. I mean, it all starts with Western mining, and that's why the focus is Kambalda. And why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you explore around Kambalda? It's been prolific. And then I guess from Kambalda, we eventually stepped out along essentially the same belt towards Leinster and ultimately Mount Keith, and that pretty much satisfied the market. And and there was probably even competition within Western mining about what part of that belt to even explore in. So there was just no real need to go exploring elsewhere. And I guess my past experience at the West Musgrave sort of enlightened me to the change in thinking there as well. The paradigm shift that was required for Western mining to actually go out and explore the West Musgrave to look for a totally different kind of ore body. Ask Mr. Hronsky here. He can tell you about the internal challenges within the company to go and do that. So I think that's partly the reason, and not to mention the fact that obviously competing land use is obviously an issue as well. And that's, you know, that's the challenge that Chalice and ourselves have had, you know, in this sort of Western Yilgarn area, an area that's historically been explored for bauxite, with no interest whatsoever in nickel or any other commodity. So a range of factors, Dom, a range of factors.
Thanks, Greg. Andrew, can I ask you, Ardea, we're due to hear from you tomorrow, but Ardea is traditionally predecessor in Herina, labelled as a laterite, nickel laterite company and forever thus, but you are doing nickel sulfide exploration. Does it take the change of mindset that Greg's alluding to there to return to an area and start drilling for nickel sulfides again? Do you look at what's happened elsewhere and say, yeah, we can approach things differently?
I think the world historically has been very much focused on sulfides, and there's a perception that they're lower capital intensity and lower OPEX, but I don't agree with that in the first instance. But secondly, you know, we've been blessed to have such a large land holding. So we've currently got about 4,200 square kilometres in the Eastern Goldfields. We're one of, if not the largest, landholder over ultramafic stratigraphy. So it's those ultramafic rocks that weather to produce the nickel laterites, where we've, you know, very fortunate to have the largest nickel cobalt resource in the country. But similarly, we can't lose sight of the exploration potential for sulfides. You know, when I first met you, Dom, you know, I was very fortunate to be part of a great team that made one of the largest uranium discoveries in the world. So, you know, I know firsthand the value that discovery success can add to a company. So we're very conscious of advancing the laterite resources to production, but at the same time, the market or some sectors of the market can get bored with feasibility study work, but we can dangle that blue sky exploration carrot. And, you know, I'm supremely confident with ongoing exploration we can make nickel sulfide discoveries, both, you know, classic Kambalda, Komatiite hosted style, but similarly also the laid mafic complexes that have been receiving a lot more attention in recent times.
Thanks, Andrew. Mark, before Chalice and Caspian came along and with their discoveries in the Western Yilgarn, you were at the vanguard of the last big discovery of a new region in the Fraser Range, and Legend were in there very, very quickly after the discovery of Nova Bollinger. What were the factors that drove that wave of exploration, and do you feel that the knowledge base being built on the Fraser Range now is ready to deliver that next major discovery?
Dom, I think it's useful to reflect on the history of the Fraser Range, and it actually goes back to the 70s when the Canadian Geol Society indicated to Newmont that there was a belt out here that had a lot of geological similarities to the Thompson Belt in Canada. And why that's so significant is that the Thompson Belt in Canada has got 2.7 million tonnes of contained nickel, and Newmont came out here and drilled a few holes, and a commodity cycle wiped them out and they left town. That was in a joint venture with Western Mining, amongst others. And then Creasy, who was he won't be offended by me saying so, a busted-ass prospector in those days, went out there trophy hunting, looking for bits of Skylab that had fallen out of the sky. And given his mind, he ordered every geol survey map from basically Esperance to Darwin, because that was the band that NASA said that this beast had fallen down, or the bits of it had. And he's out there by folklore with his Tilly lamp in his tent at night, and he saw on the legend of one of these maps that one of these holes, which Newmont had drilled, had an 8-inch or a foot-long intersection of 4% nickel and 2% copper. And he understood that the process had actually taken place. And so then you fast forward to 2012, when Sirius made their discovery in that same area at the south of the belt, because that's where the soil cover is lowest, and Sirius's Nova actually outcrops in a gossan at surface that was found subsequent to the mine. But I think what's really important from an exploration perspective is to understand that that history of the Nova discovery was an air core anomaly in the first instance. And it was the air core anomaly followed by an EM survey, which then gave the EM target for the discovery hole to get put into. So, you know, it looks like we're in the vanguard in 2015, but it actually goes right back to the 70s. And what makes me get out of bed with a spring in my step each morning is this analogy with the Thompson belt of 2.7 million tonne of nickel. And still today, we're sitting with the Fraser Range at circa 300,000.
Thanks, Mark. Nicole, you mentioned in your presentation this morning, in some ways very similar, that your founders of Nickel Search have been in the area for a long time. They've held this ground intermittently or unconsolidated for a long time. What made the here and the now attractive or enough, compelling enough to launch the company as a public company now? What were the factors that the company arrived at?
Yep. So, Dom, the founders started in the area in 1971 with mapping. So one of our founding shareholders actually mapped the area, and they originally held some of the tenements that were vended into what is now First Quantum. So they've been in that area holding tenements for decades. In terms of, the more immediate history, they were looking at a completely integrated business model. And back about 5 years ago, when everything was in the doldrums, they split the company, and Nickel Search took the tenements, and then there's a private company called Alpha Fine Chemicals that's looking at building a nickel sulfate plant, the first one in Thailand. So they did originally have a view of a completely integrated model, but then everybody said, oh, yuck, we don't understand that, it's too hard to get that. Can you please split up the company? And so now now we've got these two separate entities, but still, work closely together. So I think it really came down to the explosion with the electric vehicle battery market and the demand, and just, the feeling that the time is right. I mean, obviously the last few months have been quite tough, but the long-term demand, as we heard this morning, from say 2026, is supportive of any type of nickel discovery, whether that is a fresh discovery or being able to go back and reprocess. Every single gram of nickel is going to be needed. So, I think it was just opportunistic.
Thanks, Nicole. Mark, can I come back to you? Nicole mentioned there the market and the drive we've seen. Daniel's presentation this morning, and also IGO and BHP about projections about nickel demand from the EV sector. The market is one side of it. It drives, obviously, so much of this sector. But nickel exploration is tough business. It's hard to find a nickel deposit that's mineable. What role is technology and new thinking going to play in finding, defining, and ultimately developing these new deposits?
Dom, just speaking in our case, the major difficulty we've got is the cover that we're dealing with. And so a lot of these presentations that you've heard today, and I've been out to the booth and had several discussions with people, where this material is actually sitting on the surface and poking out of the ground. And, I think it's generally accepted that the way Western Australia in particular has been explored, there's very little left that's poking out of the ground. So the first thing you have to do is understand some technology that's going to be able to look through that cover and at least give you the geology at the top of fresh rock. And the techniques that we use for that when we started, tended to be gravity and mag surveys and looking for a combination of mag lows and gravity highs. But all that tells you is it could look like nova, and the mag might give you an eye and you can go, wow, you know, God, when I started in the Fraser Range, if you had an eye, you were in pay dirt. But that lasted about 12 months, and however, God knows what capital went into that. But it's then about air core drilling and ground EM to give you some geochemistry at the top of fresh rock, and EM gives you a conductive or a conductor. And I think most of the money that was wasted in the Fraser Range from 2012 to 2016 was people who had the belief that the conductor was the golden bullet. You went and got a conductor, you drilled it, you had another nova. Derek was running a table in our office, which I think he got project fatigue on in about 2018, because the number of conductors found in the Fraser Range was up to 180, and there was only one that was mineralised, that was nova. So clearly technology had to move on from that. And I think in our journey, what we've learned is the geochemistry is terribly important. Our Mawson discovery was from diamond drilling under a geochemical anomaly, and then it's the downhole EM from then which got us from hole 7 to hole 8. And if I could just indulge for another minute to say that that level of exploration or technology gets you to about 500 metres, and where we've gone in the last 12 months is for these seismic surveys, which are giving us structural information below 500 metres. And I think in our instance, that's going to be the technology that's driving where our drill programs are going to be going for the next 12 months. And, you know, Oliver reminds me all the time of the quotes he got for Octagonal to do seismic 4 or 5 years ago, and it was multi-millions of dollars. We've got a survey starting out there which is $1.1 million to give us a look at a 24 square kilometre footprint. You know, it'll go down a couple of kilometres. So if we can crack the code as to how this seismic really does present the rock packages, we're going to have an enormous advantage in what we argue is the best and most underexplored nickel belt, bar none, in Australia.
Thanks, Mark. Greg, go for it. You've got your microphone there.
I was just going to disagree with him about the
Fantastic. That's what we want. Let's go.
No. Fraser Range, fantastic, but it's not the world.
So, Greg, Mark's talking about the technology aspect there that's helped begin to unlock the Fraser Range. Is that the same case for the West Yilgarn? Has technology driven that, or is it good old-fashioned explorationism?
I'll be diplomatic and say it's a bit of both. Look, there's no doubt that your EM systems and whatnot are getting better all the time. You know, we're pumping more current around a loop than ever before. More sophisticated receivers. Great. But we found that, and Mark alluded to as well, that good old-fashioned soil sampling works a treat too. And so, you know, that's been around for a long time, you know, and admittedly, assay techniques are coming along and helping that process as well. But, yeah, nothing's changed on soil geochemistry, really. You still go out, dig a hole, put it through a sieve, send it to a lab. But, you know, we all know the saying about a poor tradesman blames the tools. All these things are tools, and it's really what the geologist does with it. That's the important thing.
Andrew, I see you diving straight for the microphone there, please.
Yeah, I think fundamentally it's still the 3 Gs, so the geology, geochemistry and geophysics, but we got far more sophisticated by the way we use those tools. For example, we're currently working with CSIRO on a magmatic sulphide study, clearly focused on our tenements, but there are a number of geochemical indicators that we can use with more precision now than we used to in the past, and determine if particular parts, whether it be a komatiite flow or a layered mafic complex, if there is the potential for those units to host magmatic sulphides, and that's obviously what we're chasing. And I think you used the analogy, like particularly searching for these Kambalda style komatiite hosted nickel sulphide systems that can be like looking for a needle in a haystack. You know, we had the paleo topography, we've then had, you know, these huge lava flows. Then, you know, let's say that tended to be 2.7 to 2.8 billion years ago. Then we've had, you know, post-emplacement deformation, multiple deformation events, all sorts of regional metamorphism on top of that. So you've got to untangle all those factors and, you know, take it to basics to try and make the elusive discovery. But we've definitely got more tools now at our disposal than we've ever had. And to an extent, large parts of Western Australia are still underexplored. We had another panellist touch upon it, you know, the advances in EM technology in particular. So over the last decade, you know, we see a far greater search radius by using downhole EM in particular. In our case, exploring at Emu Lake, 70 kilometres northeast of Kalgoorlie. Well, that terrain is still very much underexplored, even though we're so close to Kalgoorlie, largely because of the focus on laterites. And as we touched upon, well, historically people are focused on that Kambalda to Leinster belt, and that was one of your opening comments. I still think there's a huge amount of life left in nickel sulphide exploration within Western Australia. We're spending funds on that search at record levels, and I think new discoveries will be made, but they simply have to be made because there's no battery revolution without all resources being developed, and particularly those here in WA that can ensure that sustainable and ethical battery mineral supply.
Thanks, Andrew. Nicole, this comes back to your point that you were saying earlier, and also in your presentation this morning, I know you made mention of, one, that you're a lawyer and not a geologist, and two, that the company trusts the science and you back the science. How does that look in the company's discussions of in planning exploration programs? Does it sit with what the other panelists have been saying?
I'm really glad to say that it does, which is, you know, a big relief to me, not being a geologist. But in terms of, you know, what I'm seeing for, certainly for nickel search and certainly for explorers in Western Australia, it's all around developing resilience in our teams because, as you were saying, nickel sulphides are very difficult to identify. And you need to be able to motivate a team to continue working methodically and systematically through the data and through a drilling campaign, and, you know, to things not go to plan, to get up, dust themselves off and keep going. So just to put a slightly different slant on what people are talking about now, I also think that what exploration companies, not what's going to be really important for exploration companies to have is to have clarity around their purpose and how they'll work together as a team and what their company values are and how they'll, you know, support each other through trying exploration programs to keep everybody enthused and energised and focused on the outcome, because every single molecule of energy is going to need to be directed at exploration success, knowing how difficult it is to make that success and then to make it financially viable. So I think it's a whole bunch of tools to use, but then there's also a whole bunch of mindset to bring to those tools.
Mark?
Dom, there's another thing, because Nicole's point about people is so true. There are some long, hard yards in exploration, and those nights are very long and very cold. And I'm reminded of, you know, success has 1,000 fathers and failure's an orphan, and that tends to be the case when your hole hasn't been a duster. But you know, the key thing for me for the last 10 years has been the money honey. There has actually been money around to fund us to do our job. And the reason that money's there is because the price of nickel has risen and the projected consumption is even stronger than it is today. So I think the availability of capital in markets, and it's a range of whole number of markets, is a key element that's been driving exploration as we sit today.
Greg, would you agree with the discoveries on the West Yilgarn and even in the West Musgrave have been made in different capital markets?
Yeah, look, it's true that, you know, the saying about a rising tide floats all boats certainly rings true. But, you know, at the same time, good people attract good money. And I think if you're always doing good quality work, there will always be a market for it, or there will always be money for it. Now, what price that money's at and, you know, what are the strings attached? Well, that's, you know, goes with market sentiment, of course, but good people attract money.
Thanks. I've been incredibly greedy here and asked all the questions myself. I'd like to open it up to the floor. There must be, after a day of fantastic exploration, production and downstream stories, there must be a few questions from the audience. Have we got any? Now, this doesn't count as a question because he's a colleague of mine from Paydirt, so it's all part of the same team.
I was just actually going to follow on Greg's last point. You touched on it, obviously, about rising tide, as a saying. Another saying is that juniors make the best explorers. Given the project that you were obviously instrumental in developing up to where it is now, looks like it's going to be the next mine in WA. Does that saying ring more true now?
Yeah, look, well, that's an interesting. So the West Musgrave was an interesting collaboration between a junior and a major, and which you don't necessarily see a lot of. I mean, you know, there's joint ventures all the time, but you know, a lot of the majors tend to sit back and wait for juniors to supposedly de-risk a project. It's complete garbage. You know, actually what the junior is doing is actually building risk into the project the further they take it in terms of development. Juniors are great for finding stuff because they're prepared to take risk, which majors generally don't. And sorry, actually I don't want to sound like a cowboy. It's not take risk, it's take educated risk. So, you know, because every dollar matters. So juniors are great at finding stuff, but the West Musgrave was a collaboration with somebody who came in early with a development scenario in mind, and I think that's a model that other you know, mid-tiers and bigger miners can follow. You know, everybody wants to follow it, but you know, you just don't see it. I think they're perhaps afraid of jumping in and doing it, but there should be more of it, and I think there will be more of it because, you know, as I said earlier. Projects like Nevo Babel are getting scarcer and scarcer. So, and we're seeing the big boys come down the ladder, if you like, into the junior space, looking for opportunities. So, yeah, good people will attract money, and they'll probably attract supporters of you know, in the industry as well.
Thanks, Michael. We've got a question here, just to your left, James.
Hi. Thanks, James Stroll. Just interesting around exploration, and I've been really interested listening today around all the exciting things going on. And so I come back to communities. Okay, and it's a really interesting thing because the whole nickel cycle, and if I'm lucky enough to be privileged, being the CEO of the Shire of Coolgardie and seeing what's gone through in Kambalda. And if you talk about the community in Kambalda, we saw what Western Mining did, and it was amazing things, built a whole city. But then they walked away, and East Kambalda's left and the Shire of Coolgardie and the community's left with having to deal with 45-year-old infrastructure. And we're having to fix it all, deal with it and things. So I'm just interested in, with your exploration and with where we're going to, if you take nickel sulphide and everything and electric batteries and things, there's a massive change that's going to come and a significant impact on communities. And I'm just interested in how much of that, when you're going through your exploration, or is it the wrong time, or isn't it the right time, to actually think about, with what you're doing, what impacts is going to happen short term, medium term and long term on communities.
Thanks, James. Andrew first, and then I think, Nicole, you've probably got some things to say. Yeah, Andrew, please.
Yeah, terrific question. And from an exploration perspective, working with your local communities is always the first place you start. You can't get on the ground without engaging. And I guess in our case, we're very lucky to have a permanent presence in the city of Kalgoorlie-Boulder. We've got a local office and we've got a locally based team. I'm in Kalgoorlie at least twice a month. I'm engaging with a large number of our local stakeholders. So that has to be priority number one. As the company evolves and you've got more funding support and you've got more resources at your disposal, well, you can do more. We're still an explorer. We don't have the cash flow of a major producer, but you know what, we do our share of heavy lifting in the local community. That be the Shire of Menzies and the city of Kalgoorlie-Boulder, where our projects are located. But it's priority number one, and it's all stakeholders. So yeah, terrific question.
It's a very tricky point to manage in such cyclical natured business as mining. And I think it's all around staying engaged with the community as best you can from as early as you can and as genuinely as you can, in terms of making sure that the explorer is engaging with the local community, and then as there is exploration success, it's being engaged not only with local but regional, and then, you know, potentially as you grow and develop, then national, and just trying to manage your stakeholders at all levels, so that as your business grows and then contracts, you can make sure that the right stakeholder is supporting your needs at that time in your business. So when you are relatively small, it's all about the local community, but also with state having a massive role to play in terms of regulation and oversight. But as you grow, then it's about drawing resources from the national level, so that you don't, or as much as you can, you manage your draw on the local and state. It's an incredibly difficult nut to crack, and no one's got a silver bullet. So it just takes a bucket load of sustained commitment and engagement, and just trying to do your best with integrity.
Can I make an observation to show what can be done? It's an absolute credit. We're very privileged in Coolgardie of what Mincor have done, because Mincor have done exactly what you've said. They've taken us on the journey right from the start. So they came into my office, presented to council 3.5 years ago, took us along the whole journey, and I know you're all aware of those sort of things, and the significant positive impact that's had on the community was absolutely massive, because now, you know, we're seeing it. So thank you. You know, and that's for us as a great example of what can be done when you take us on the journey right through the line, from, you know, before they were hitting the ground to producing things and stuff. And it's brilliant. So it's a good example of what can be done when things are changed. And because of that, Mincor are completely trusted in the community. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Greg, did you have anything to add? You alluded to earlier the fact that in the region that you operate is got a history, controversial history, if you like, in bauxite mining. Has it been difficult to reset the agenda for Caspian?
I wouldn't say difficult, but it takes time. And, trust takes a lot of time to build, an incident to wreck or destroy. So it's part and parcel of what we do. We probably take it for granted, to be honest. It goes without saying that you have to work with the people in your communities, whether they're an agricultural community like in ours, or a mining community around Kalgoorlie, or an Aboriginal community out in the desert. we do everything we possibly can to work within those communities. Sure.